Very warm welcome to BBC News. My name is Mike Embley. The top stories. President Trump's former campaign chair is sentenced to nearly 4 years in jail for conspiracy and fraud, shorter than expected, but he must repay more than $6 million to the US government. Britain escalates efforts to secure Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's release from an Iranian jail, giving her diplomatic protection. El Salvador's Supreme Court frees 3 women who spent a decade behind bars accused of breaking strict abortion laws. A report from Greenland, where a rise in rain means a gloomy outlook for the ice sheet. Hello to you. In just the past few hours, President Trump's former campaign chief, Paul Manafort, has been sentenced to 47 months in prison for money laundering, conspiracy and fraud. A much longer sentence had been expected, but he must also repay more than $6 million to the US government. Special Counsel Robert Mueller revealed the crimes as part of his investigation into Russian interference in the presidential election. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. First, here is Paul Manafort's defense counsel outside the court.
As you heard in court today, Mr. Manafort finally got to speak for himself. He made clear he accepts responsibility for his conduct. And I think most importantly, what you saw today is the same thing that we had said from day one. There is absolutely no evidence that Paul Manafort was involved with any collusion with any government official from Russia.
47 months in prison is far less than Paul Manafort could have expected. Prosecutors were pushing for up to 24 years behind bars, but the judge said that kind of sentence would be unwarranted. Just before sentence was passed, Paul Manafort spoke to the court. He was seated in a wheelchair wearing a green jumpsuit. He said the past 2 years have been the most difficult ones of his life, and he asked the court for compassion. He'll have to pay restitution of $24 million and fines of $50,000. Next week, he'll face sentencing in a separate case in the District of Columbia, where he could get another 10 years in jail. The question now is the extent to which his cooperation before it broke down with the special counsel, Robert Mueller, to what extent that will feed in to Mr. Mueller's final report on alleged Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, and whether or not Mr. Manafort will get pardoned by the president for the crimes he's committed.
Gary O'Donoghue there outside the court. Let's speak to Eugene Gorokov. He's from the law firm Berneman and Gorokov in Washington, D.C. I know you specialise in white-collar and federal criminal defence. What did you make of this?
Mike, I was quite frankly surprised by the sentence. As you know, it's a very large difference between the advisory sentencing guidelines range, which came in at 19.5 years, and the sentence that he actually received, which was just 1 month over 4 years. So I was surprised. I guess I was encouraged. I think that Judge Ellis took a very close look at Mr. Manafort's background, the life that he's lived outside of these offenses, and I think that Judge Ellis gave this very close and careful consideration.
This is a curious case too, isn't there? Because there's another case coming up next week as well, where the sentence could be, I think, up to 10 years.
That's right. This is such a interesting and strange case in many ways. The fact that there are parallel federal prosecutions going on just on 2 sides of the river here, it's kind of unprecedented. I think the issues in the case in D.C. are interesting because of the witness tampering charges, because of the what the government has alleged to be a failed cooperation agreement. So it'll be interesting to see what Judge Berman Jackson does with that.
And there was a plea deal, of course, wasn't there? I think revoked because he was found to have lied to the FBI and contacted witnesses. I guess we shouldn't forget how extraordinary it is, though, that Donald Trump's former campaign chair has admitted passing on information to someone widely believed to be an agent of Russian intelligence and living this lavish lifestyle funded by money he effectively laundered.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's an unprecedented case in so many ways. It's not every day that you see a campaign chairman prosecuted not in one but two federal courts. I would note that, and as Judge Ellis noted in his sentencing today, that the charges that Mr. Manafort was convicted of and sentenced for today are essentially run-of-the-mill white-collar charges. At least in the Virginia case, we're not talking about any kind of collusion or anything like that. In the D.C. case, we are talking about something that strikes much closer to the heart of international politics with the Foreign Agent Registration Act, but that's another case.
There are also, I think, some documents which there's an attempt to unseal, which could be of interest to people.
That's right, and of course, the fact that they're sealed, it'll be interesting to see what's there. I don't think we should speculate as to what's there until those documents come out.
Understood. Eugene Gorokov, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
And in just the past half hour, we've also heard the UK government is granting a special status to Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, the British citizen being held in prison in Iran. She's accused of spying. She's an aid worker. She went on hunger strike recently and protested her treatment. She denies any wrongdoing. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has the latest details.
It's extremely rare for the British government to grant diplomatic protection to any of its citizens. It just simply, no one at the Foreign Office can remember it ever happening before. Essentially what it means is that the British government has decided that the way Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe has been treated by Iran has not met its international obligations. She hasn't been given the right medical treatment or due process in the law courts. And as a result, the British state has decided that it should give full protection to Mrs. Zaghari Ratcliffe. Now, what that means is that instead of this being a consular issue, this is now a formal legal dispute between the British government and the Iranian government. Now, in practical terms, that doesn't mean that Iran is now forced to do anything to treat her in a better way in jail in Tehran, where she's been held since 2016. But what it does mean is now that the British government can raise her case more easily in international forums like the United Nations, because it's not a consular issue, as I say, it is a formal international dispute between two nations. So the British can look for more allies and try and put more pressure on Iran. It does potentially, theoretically, open potential legal avenues. The UK could, in theory, end up trying to sue the Iranian regime for compensation, but officials make it very clear they're not going to go down that route. They don't want to get this bogged down in international courts the next 2 or 3 years. What they want to do is to put more diplomatic pressure on Iran to essentially say, look, the way you've been treating her is not acceptable, you have to release her soon, and that this issue is not going away, and the British government is not going to give up on her. So it's a pretty strong signal. The question now, of course, will be how the Iranians respond. Do they respond positively, or do they double down and say, actually, no, this is going to worsen relations rather than make things better?
James Landale for us there. Let's quickly round up some more of the main news. 2 Islamist militants have been found guilty of an anti-Semitic attack that killed 4 people in Brussels in 2014. Mehdi Nenmouche had opened fire in the Jewish Museum in the Belgian capital with weapons supplied by his accomplice, Nasser Bondrier. The Archbishop of Lyon, one of the most senior figures in the Catholic Church in France, has been given a 6-month suspended sentence for failing to report child sexual abuse. This was a case brought privately by a victims' association. Cardinal Philippe Barbarin says he will go to Rome to offer Pope Francis his resignation. President Trump's former personal lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen has started legal proceedings in New York against the Trump Organization. He was sentenced in December to 3 years in prison. He accuses the group of failing to reimburse him for nearly $4 million in legal fees incurred while working for the Trump Organization. Facebook is saying it will try to stop the spread of misinformation about vaccines. It's going to remove misleading content, it says, and disable accounts that still violate Facebook's policies on vaccine information. The company's been facing pressure to tackle the problem. Outbreaks of measles in the US and elsewhere have been attributed to the growing numbers of parents who refuse to vaccinate their children. Japan is also fighting the worst measles outbreak in years. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has defended his handling of a growing controversy that's already led to 2 ministerial resignations. He's denied that one of his key aides tried to put inappropriate pressure on the then Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould. not to pursue charges against a leading engineering firm accused of corruption. She maintains she was pressured. Netta Tawfik reports from Ottawa.
He's the golden boy of progressive politics who outshines other leaders on the international stage. Justin Trudeau came into power promising to be different, honest, transparent, and inclusive. But now he's facing allegations that his office improperly pressured the former Attorney General to shield the engineering firm SNC-Lavalin from a corruption trial. In a press conference,